One. Hey guys, Daniel here. This is another video, and in this video, my next guest, he needs no introduction. It's the legendary Jason Aaron. I'm going to give him an introduction anyway. He's done so much great things. He's the man who killed Punisher. He actually literally turned Daredevil into a god. It is the one, the only Jason Aaron. Jason is a writer best known for his work on comics such as Scalped, Wolverine, Ghost Rider, Star Wars, King Conan, The Punisher, Sea of Stars, Men of Wrath, The Other Side, Doctor Strange, and amongst so much more. He's also written Thor, where he's created characters such as Gorr The God Butcher, and he turned Jane Foster into Thor. But of course, his work on Thor was so influential that Taika Waititi has said that it's a huge inspiration for the new Thor Love and Thunder film. So I'm so happy to be able to arrange this. Jason is a lovely guy, so I'm so excited to chat with him. Jason, thank you so much for coming on. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. That's a great intro. Thanks for having me.
You'd be surprised how much times I practiced it before we begin. But yeah, no, so thank you so much. But so many different questions because you've done like a huge volume of comics. Like it's impossible to be a comic book fan and not see your name everywhere. But my first question for you is, how did you get into comics?
Like, how did I get into reading or
Yeah,
writing?
reading.
You know, since I was a little kid, I think I learned how to read from reading comics. You know, my mom would take me to the drugstore, the grocery store, and I'd buy them off the spinner rack like that.
Oh,
And I got another spinner rack in my basement, in my bedroom, and it's filled with all the books that I bought off the spinner rack when I was a kid.
wow.
So like back in the early '80s, mostly DC stuff really when I was a kid. So a lot of Batman and
Yes.
Atari Force and Blue Devil and so yeah, I mean I kind of got into it big when I was a kid. You know, I didn't go to a comic book store till I was probably 16,
Wow.
just because I lived in a small town where we didn't have comic book stores. So once I went to a comic book store, I was like, oh my God, you know, like there's all this stuff I'd never seen and just really never quit, you know, never quit reading. I've kind of always had once I found a comic book store and realized you could do a pull list,
Yeah.
I've had a pull list somewhere or another, you know, for like 30 something years at this point.
Yeah, and if you ever get comics and anyone's complaining, you can just say, "Oh, it's for research," and it's for an idea I may do in a couple years.
No, it literally is for research. Like it literally is. Like I realized at some point I had to be careful about what I like back issues I was buying at the comic book shop because guys started to pay attention to like what be like, oh, I see what you're going to be writing next because you're buying all these issues of such and such.
Ah,
And
yes.
sometimes it's like, you know, no, I'm not superheroes. I'm just buying some of Legion of Superheroes comics.
Yeah. Can I not read
Well,
just one comic in peace? I
right.
imagine the life of a comic book writer is just paparazzi outside with the top headlines.
Sure,
It's,
exactly. It's
it's that,
exactly like
yeah,
that.
that's it to a T. But then, so what was,
Only when you go in a comic book store,
yeah, of course. I imagine they have like secret cameras installed just to film you walking around. Oh, look,
sure.
he touched a Batman comic. Could that be a sign? They just have a big board or somewhere. But yeah, so how did you get in? How did you actually start working in comics? What was your first comic book work?
Well, I won a Marvel Comics talent search contest back in
Wow.
2001, which was this weird thing Marvel had not really done before, and they haven't done one since. So it was this kind of strange one-time opportunity that literally I typed up a synopsis for a Wolverine story and dropped it on a big pile of them at a comic convention, and won and got to write I don't remember now. It's like 8 or 10 page Wolverine story,
Wow.
which was published in 2002. So that was I mean, that I kind of had always wanted to write comics since I was, the kid who was reading them off the spinner
Oh,
rack. Pretty quickly said, "Oh, I want to do this someday," and had absolutely no idea how you go about doing that. And I grew up in a small town. Yes, yeah, there we go.
of course.
Um,
Like I said, research. Wink, wink, nudge,
and I
nudge.
think that the story I wrote from the talent search is in one of those Wolverine
Oh no
collections
way.
too. I don't know which one. Um,
There's probably so
but
many.
yeah, I'd always wanted to do that. It just took until I won that talent search to kind of give me the confidence to say, okay, maybe I could do this, and kind of open the door a little bit for me. But it still took, after I won that, it took another 5 years before I had more books coming out.
Yeah, and so you brought up Wolverine. After that Wolverine story, you did they offer you more Wolverine work? or how did you end up writing some more like Wolverine stories?
Well, I mean, when I won that talent search contest, I thought, okay, cool. This is like, the keys to the kingdom. So now I'm going to be doing all kind of stuff, and it didn't really work out that way. But I was pitching a lot of stuff, and one of the things I pitched was a relaunch of Marvel's The Nam. Marvel did this Vietnam War book back in the '80s, which was really cool. Had Michael Golden did the first several issues. So I pitched a relaunch of that, which got turned down, but I kind of kept that pitch and took it around to kind of everybody else I could think of. And one of the places I sent it was to Will Dennis at Vertigo, because he had edited all those Garth Ennis war comics, which are really great. And that ended up being kind of my next break. So I started doing Vertigo stuff. That first book I did was called The Other Side.
Yes.
And then that led to doing Scalped, which was my first ongoing series. And that went for like 60 issues. So kind of doing that stuff sort of brought me back to Marvel. Axel Alonso, who had been at Vertigo kind of before Will, saw my Vertigo stuff and gave me more Wolverine work. So I started doing Wolverine and then Ghost Rider, and I've kind of been at Marvel ever since.
You've given me so many brilliant leeways or segues to get into, but let's touch on Wolverine for a little bit. Now, Wolverine, your work on Wolverine is some of my favorite of your works. You really have a great understanding of the character of Wolverine. So do you think, like, over time, like as opposed to your first Wolverine story, that 8-page fan story you did for Marvel, do you think that you kind of got a better grasp of who the character was over time? Like, no, he'd say this or he'd respond by saying this.
Sure. I think you develop, kind of your voice for that character. But I also think the stories I wanted to do with Wolverine changed as I went. I mean, Wolverine's one of those characters I like so much because you can kind of put him in all different sorts of stories, right? Like you can do, dark kind of espionage stories, action stories, horror stories, stories from different periods of time. So you can do all kind of different stuff with him. So I think over the course of all the Wolverine stuff I did, which was like, I think about 6 years, I was writing Wolverine and constantly, whether it was, an ongoing series, mini, whatever. And that led into Wolverine and the X-Men. Like I did a lot of different stuff with him, and some of it, over the course of that period when my comic career began and started to take off, my life was changing, and then I got married and became a father. So I think all that kind of played into what I wanted to do with Wolverine as well. And I very much think Wolverine and the X-Men, where Wolverine became headmaster of the school, was very much about me kind of writing about being a dad. For Wolverine, I wanted him to have that moment where he goes from being like the cool loner guy with the claws to now he's like the father figure who's having to keep these kids in line. I had a lot of fun doing that. So I mean, I liked doing all that different kind of stuff. But for sure, you learn more about those characters as you go.
Yeah. And so is that your favorite aspect of Wolverine? The fact that you can put him in almost any type of story, like a war story, an action story, espionage story. Is that your favorite aspect of the character?
Probably so, yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's one I had the most fun with. Because, it's, again, you can kind of do anything, right? Like you can do
Even a
like art.
musical? Would that work for Wolverine? A musical?
Sure, I could do that. I could see that. You'd have to be very particular about which songs you picked, but
Yeah.
yes. I mean, I had, I had Wolverine reference at times, like what kind of music he listened to, what kind of music he liked, and what books he read. So
Yeah.
I mean, I loved, even within one series, like from arc to arc, to change it up and do different genres and different tones. To me was really, really fun. And you can't do that with all characters, but with him, you absolutely can.
Yeah. And now, so this Wolverine compendium, everyone should go pick this up. This is volume 2, but there's also volume 1. So every story in this is written by you. That's correct?
Yeah. Yep.
And if you look at that, that's a lot of Wolverine work. So, if you're starved for Jason Aaron content, this is the book for you. But one of my favorite stories, and there's so much great Wolverine stories, action stories, but one of my favorite ones you did is where Nightcrawler dies and Wolverine, and in his will, he wanted Wolverine to drag a piano up like a huge mountain. I'm not sure if you remember that, but I think, you know, it's something like as simplistic. Like you said, you can do basically anything with Wolverine. And I loved how you kind of utilized the supporting cast of Wolverine, because he does have like the whole X-Men. And I loved how you used other characters. So do you have a favorite X-Men like Nightcrawler or Cyclops besides Wolverine, of course?
Well, I definitely enjoyed writing Nightcrawler, and I enjoyed writing that relationship between Wolverine and
Yeah,
Nightcrawler, because they're such, they're two very different people. Their views on life and faith
ridiculous.
and all that sort of stuff are very different. And I liked the idea of that kind of influence that would have on Wolverine. So yeah, I was really proud of that story that you're talking about.
Brilliant.
And then, also I brought Nightcrawler back to life later when I did Amazing X-Men, and that's got a splash page in it that's just a big hug. It's Wolverine and Nightcrawler hugging for the first time in forever. So yeah, even though I did, I never wrote much Nightcrawler stuff outside of stories that also involved Wolverine. I definitely really liked writing him.
Yeah.
But I liked Quentin Quire a lot.
Well, yeah,
I was a big fan of the Grant Morrison X-Men run.
of course.
So I always stuck Quentin Quire and whatever I was working on. He was a big part of Wolverine the X-Men, and he showed up in Thor at one point. So I've always really liked writing him too.
Of course. And so after Wolverine, you started working Ghost Rider. Is that right?
Yeah, well, kind of, I think I was still doing Wolverine stuff, and then Ghost
Oh
Rider
yeah.
was the first time I got offered an ongoing series.
Yeah, and so this is actually one of the first ever graphic novels I actually ever got. I think I got it in Canada on
Cool.
holiday, because Ghost Rider, I think I was young enough, and I think he was in a Lego game, but he's just this skeleton who's on fire, who wears a leather jacket. It's like,
Right, and rides a motorcycle.
yeah, how more badass can you get? I need to read about it.
Exactly.
But then I, of course, had to unearth it for this interview. But yeah, so Ghost Rider, you've actually worked on a few different versions. You've done the Robbie Reyes and the Danny Ketch, and then, of course, the main one, Johnny Blaze. So you've gotten to do quite a few ones. So do you have a favorite version of Ghost Rider?
Um,
Impossible question.
yeah, I for that, for that ongoing series I was doing, I loved writing the Johnny Blaze. I kind of always preferred the Blaze version to the Danny Ketch version. I think
Yeah.
some of it depends on like what age you are and when did you
Yeah.
start reading comics. So I read, some of the Danny Ketch stuff back in the 90s when that started, and dug it, but he was never like my favorite. So I always, with that book, I very much wanted to make Johnny Blaze front and center. But yeah, the more recent stuff with the Avengers, I really like the Robbie Reyes character. I like the idea of Ghost Rider driving this big, scary muscle car.
Yeah.
And I liked the idea of a guy being in the Avengers who drives a car, like that's part of his thing.
It just gives them Uber,
So
like he's an Uber. He just brings them everywhere. That's his purpose.
right. Yeah, I've really enjoyed having him being a part of the Avengers, and there's like some big Robbie Reyes stuff that's coming pretty soon too.
Oh, wow.
That I'll be doing as a part of that I'm excited about.
Yeah, and like before your series, I was kind of like a Robbie Reyes cool character. I wasn't too pushed about him, like, but after like your work on the Avengers with him and She-Hulk, I'm like, oh man, a Robbie Reyes is a really cool character, and he's certainly up there now. But speaking of Avengers, did issue 47 just drop recently?
Yeah, I think it just came out last week. Yeah,
And people can get that from their local comic book store.
yes, they can,
Oh,
and
you
as
see,
well they should.
they definitely should. They're obliged now that they've watched this. They just have to. But yeah, of course. So speaking of Avengers, like that was like Robbie Reyes, She-Hulk, and like Blade and Doctor Strange, all these cool characters. And your work on the Avengers has been amazing. But how did the Avengers come about? Did you receive an email from an editor that said, "Want to do the Avengers"?
Kind of, I've been at Marvel for, again, probably about 15 years now, I guess, at this point. In one form or another, and been exclusive for a long time. And so yeah, there's always discussions going as books come open and things shuffle around. And I'd kind of been, talked about doing the Avengers before, but the timing wasn't right.
Yeah.
So then this point, it worked out to where this was the right timing, as I came off of
Nice.
Star Wars and was coming off of Thor. It was just the right time to do it.
Yeah, and so I imagine it's harder to do a team book as opposed to like a singular character. Because if you're writing an issue, you have to be like, oh, I didn't give Iron Man enough time in this issue, or I didn't give this character enough time. So I imagine it's quite harder to write a team book as opposed to a singular character.
Yeah, it's way harder. I think I'd kind of forgotten that from doing Wolverine the X-Men because I hadn't done another team book, I think, in a long time. It is hard. Yeah, it's hard to balance everything exactly like you're saying, like trying to give everybody their own moments, balancing, figuring out the different relationships between all those characters and which ones are interesting. And then, when you're doing Avengers, you're talking about characters who also all have their own books. So
Yeah.
you have to dance between, well, like Captain America's in jail for a period of time in his book. Like, do we reflect that? Do we not? Like, for you want everybody to be able to tell the stories they want to tell, and you want to tell yours, and then kind of weave in when it works to tie in, and then try to hedge it a little bit when things don't line up. So yeah, it's a lot. There's a lot of all that to
Yeah.
juggle month to month.
So that must be incredibly fun. But did you get to choose the lineup of the characters, or was that a conversation that Marvel had?
No, that was me. I mean, we kind of knew at that, going into it, that this would be the time to put Cap, Iron Man, and Thor back, because we hadn't had the three of them like leading an Avengers book for a
Mm.
bit. So beyond those big three, it was kind of up to me to fill in around them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so another character I want to bring up. This character you've done quite a bit of work on, but the Orb. I'm sure you know he's just one big floating eye. He's so great.
Sure.
I love him so much. He's a bit ridiculous. Like I love eyeballs so much. I just want to roll around on them. Yeah, that's like up there villain monologue. But is the Orb your favorite comic book villain of all time?
I don't know if he's been my favorite, but he's certainly been the one I've probably used more than anybody else.
He just comes
Um,
up, like it's impossible to write a story without the Orb. He's in there somewhere. I like to think in every story the Orb's just out there in the night. Just
right. Well, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I first used him in Ghost Rider because he was just one of. Well, there was another version of the Orb who's one of the old Ghost Rider villains, and I brought this guy in as a new guy. The old version of just wore a helmet that looked like a giant eyeball, but I wanted a guy who actually had a giant eyeball for a head.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and then he just kept coming up again and again and again. When I'd write something else, I'd find a place for the Orb in that. And that's continued on to Original Sin, where he became like a huge part of it, which that wasn't even my idea. That was Tom Brevoort's idea. That was his suggestion to put the
Nice.
Orb in it. Um, and then he's continued to pop up, and I wrote something recently that had the Orb in it. That's a really,
Wow.
really big story for the Orb that you'll have to look for
Of course I will.
in the
It's just
months to come.
give Orb his own mini series, Give him his own 6-part Disney Plus TV show. Just give him everything. He's a character that deserves it. But of course, so coming off, you've also gotten to do quite some creator-owned work, I suppose you could say, like on series such as Scalped. And now, Scalped, was that one of your first ever comic book series?
Yeah, that was the very first ongoing series I ever did. So
And
the Scalp.
60 issues, like, whew.
Yeah, I mean, we luckily got to tell the whole story that we wanted to tell,
Yeah.
which was kind of one of the last of those long Vertigo runs. There weren't too many of those after us, so I was really happy that I got to get one of those, because I grew up as such a huge fan of Vertigo.
Yeah.
So much stuff from Grant and Garth Ennis and Brian Azzarello, and um, writers that I'm such huge fans of.
Yeah, and Garth Dennis, Ireland's own, of course, and you definitely
Right.
reached him there. But yeah, no. So of course you got to do like so much different series, but Scalp, like it was an ongoing, and our ongoing's hard for you because at the end of every issue you kind of have to have that thing that brings them back, like no, it's me or something like that. So is that kind of tough for you for like to have a story in every issue, or you want to tell the story, but it's like 30 issues long, so you can't do that, or is that tough for you?
I mean, it's they all have their different challenges, right? Like
Yeah,
writing Avengers versus writing a creator-owned book. I mean, creator-owned book, you don't have to worry about any continuity. It's all the stuff you pull out of your own head, but you also don't get to rely on amazing stories that other creators have told in the past.
Yeah.
So to me, with creator-owned books, it's kind of just been about knowing what the story is, knowing how it starts, where it goes, how it ends, and then kind of giving yourself room to explore the different characters along the way.
Yeah.
And we certainly did that with Scalped. Like I pretty quickly we did an arc that focused on, or each issue focused on different characters, because I knew it was going to be about those characters. Well, that was the selling point, right? Was we wanted you to spend time with these characters. Like that with everything I do. Some stuff's maybe a little more plot driven, but generally it's about figuring out who these people are and wanting you to want to spend time with them, right? Like even if
Yeah.
they're really, really terrible people,
Yeah, and I
you
imagine
still
that
want to
that's
know.
oh, sorry. I imagine that that's quite difficult when, like, if you're writing something like Wolverine, people already like Wolverine, so they're gonna pick it up. But when you're doing your own thing, it's up to you to make people like these characters, or hate them if that's what you're going for.
Right. Well, I
Is that
think
hard?
yeah, I mean, I think you have to do that also with Marvel characters.
Oh yeah?
So, I mean, I think it's a mistake to like assume people already know these characters and love them. A lot of the people who are buying that book too, but I think you also have to show like why do I like this character? Like why should you stick around and read this character's adventures? I don't think you can ever assume, everybody knows like who Thor is. They know what Thor's adventures are like. They're already invested in Thor. I think no, you got to put that in every
Yeah.
issue of like the refresh of make you invested in this character. Um, yeah, because even though you got 60 years behind you, you can't rely on that, right? Like you gotta put something new in there and put something of yourself in there, to
Yeah.
keep people invested.
Yeah, and that's true. Like, not everyone will come to a book liking a character except for the orb, because everyone loves the orb. There's not one person in this world that doesn't like the orb. That's just human nature.
I'm sure there is, but I
We
don't
don't talk about
associate.
them. Yeah.
Right, I don't associate with those people.
If anyone comes up to your con table, says, they don't like the orb, you just close the line up there.
Right.
But yeah, no. So of course, some other creator on series you got to work on, Sea of Stars, which was kind of actually a really personal story, but you co-wrote that with another writer. Would I be correct in saying so?
Yeah, Dennis Hopeless. He and I, friends and both Kansas City guys, and
Amazing writer.
yeah, we started talking about doing a book together. And the way, I've co-written other things.
Yeah.
I've never really co-written anything quite like this. To where Sea of Stars, we knew it was going to be a kind of a space adventure story, the kind of two very different stories in one. So you have this kid who's lost in space, and he's on very much this kind of fun flying through space with talking space animals kind of adventure. Meanwhile, his dad's trying to find him, and the dad's having a totally different kind of experience, and his is very hellish and nightmarish, and he's surrounded by things that want to kill him and eat him as he's searching desperately for his son. So we broke it down to where I would write the kid stuff and
Oh
Dennis
yeah.
would write the dad. Um, and then there are times those two stories slam together and we kind of break it up in different ways. So that's been really cool to kind of do two different books, that are one book. And we just recently wrote the last issue of that, which
Wow.
is where that one, we did different than kind of any ones we've done before, where we very much broke it all into pieces, where he would write 5 pages, I'd write 5 pages, and we just pass it back and forth. So yeah, it's been a really, really unique, fun experience to do that book. And yeah, I think it's very different than anything else I've ever done.
Oh yeah, and like you've touched a lot of genres like that. You can do a really space fun action adventure. You can also do these really gritty noir stories. You can also do these really uplifting superhero stories. So do you? Because you do see some writers who definitely have their ballpark, like they'll play in a specific genre. But you go from every genre. So is that something you like to do? Do you like coming up with new ideas in these different worlds, essentially?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Sort of like I was talking about with the Wolverine stuff, how I'd like to mix that up arc to arc and do different
Yeah,
different kind of like that's what I gravitate towards. I think I'm like that as a reader, as a consumer of entertainment. Like I like a little bit of everything,
yeah,
right? And I think I'm very much like that as a creator. Like I don't want all my books to sound the same, or hit the same nerves. You know, of course, there are common themes and things I'm interested in, but I like doing a lot of different stuff. Um, you know, and that I want that to continue. I think the next few creator-owned things I do will be very different from anything I've done before.
Yeah, and so is there a genre you'd like to touch that you haven't gotten to work in yet?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to do a Western someday. I mean, I think
Yes.
nobody's like clamoring for Westerns and they don't really seem to sell, but you know, Scalped hit some of the Western nerve for me, but I'd still like to do a full-on Western. Um, and beyond that, yeah, I mean, you know, I haven't done like a straight horror book, so I'd like to do that at some point too. And yeah, just I mean everything. Like I'd kind of like to leave by the time I'm done. You know, when I've shuffled away from comics, I'd like to have touch every genre I possibly could.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I imagine I shouldn't pitch you my Orb Western comic, or maybe for another
Now
time.
we're talking.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
orb and the cowboy hat. I'm
And it
sold right
Yeah.
there.
And it works for a horror comic as well, you know? You can just go up against all these like unbeatable threats. Now, he's a character you can just do anything with, even a musical. Wolverine, maybe not so much with the orb, on the other hand. Um, but yeah, so I'd imagine.
Lovely,
Sorry.
lovely singing voice, the orb. Little known fact. Beautiful singer.
Yeah, but you brought up that point. You kind of give these characters a voice as you write for them. Like, do you like, because maybe you grew up watching an X-Men cartoon, like I know a lot of people did. Um, Maybe if you're writing a scene for Wolverine, do you have a specific actor's voice in your head, or do you just like come up with these voices for these characters? Oh, they'd sound like this.
No, I don't think I
No.
have a specific actor's voice in my head. Yeah, I did. I didn't really. I was a little bit too old for the X-Men cartoon. I was more
Mm.
Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends was my first big Marvel cartoon, which Wolverine pops up in that at one point and has a terrible, terrible accent. Like,
Was it the Australian accent?
is it? Yeah, I don't remember. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah, I think it is. That was his first
it's
appearance.
really bad. So yeah, I definitely don't have that in my head.
No.
You know, I don't know. I think, I mean, if anything, I'll say dialogue out loud a lot while I'm writing it, which is, you know, it's good. I work alone because
Yeah.
I'll be talking about killing people constantly, I guess, as I'm sitting here at my desk. But um, yeah, so I guess if anything, it's my voice, you know, literally as I'm saying dialogue out loud.
Yeah, but that's something I've noticed in your work, how you can kind of slip into these worlds and like you give these characters like this is exactly how I think they'd sound, and you can go from a character like Thor to the Punisher. I mean, like they of course Thor has this more like Norse type of language. You'd see him refer to things, and then the Punisher on the other hand, wouldn't as much. He's more like dark and gritty. So I love how you give all these characters their very own distinct voice. So is that important to you, trying to kind of nail these characters?
For sure, yeah, for sure. You know,
Mhm.
I think you don't, again, like you don't, I don't want everybody to sound like my voice, you know, and I don't want everybody to sound the same. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's a challenge in terms of these characters that have, in some sense, a very established voice, right? Like Thor's
Yeah.
voice has been established by different writers over the course of decades. So you want to honor that and go with that, but also, uh, you know, doesn't mean they have to sound exactly like the way Stan Lee wrote them, you know, in 1968. So I think you can still change and develop stuff as you go, and you know, it's the same. Like, you know, I wrote Star Wars, um, so you know, literally, you could sit in the day and watch every time these characters spoke. So you know, how do you take that and make them sound like the character people know, as you're doing stories that we've never seen them in before? So that's part of the challenge, but that's also part of the fun part, right?
Yeah.
Of getting to do this for a living.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, just to touch on create your own work, I'd imagine there's a bit that's a bit more freeing, like doing your own series. Because if you want, like, especially in Scalped or some other comic, you can say, okay, this character dies. But if you're writing the X-Men, you maybe you can't kill off a main character as easily. So, do you notice that there's a bit more like creative freedom in your create your own works?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, because you know, there's nobody to tell you no, right?
Yeah.
Like the I mean, you know, I'm lucky in terms of the what I do at Marvel, that I've been there a long time. I think I get a lot of trust, and I know the people I work with, so I don't have to. I'm not generally getting notes from people I don't know or that I can't call up and talk to on the phone. But with creator owned, like I don't have to talk to anybody, like stuff you do at Image, like Image doesn't know what's going to be in that issue until you send it to them because it's done and it's time to go to print. So yeah, it's complete freedom. It very much feels like every creator owned book is its own little small business where there's just 3 or 4 of you, sitting in a room figuring out, okay, what do we want this comic to be? So yeah, it's like I said, there's still challenges within that. The good side is, yeah, you get
Yeah.
to make all these decisions yourself. The bad side is you have to make all the decisions. So it's still like it is like running your own little business each time. And that I do stuff for Marvel. There's literally, when I go to visit Marvel's offices, there's like 2 floors of people whose job it is to do all this stuff, to put these comics out, to market them. The you don't get to rely on all that when you're doing a creator-owned book. You got to do all that stuff yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And so coming off your career and work, someone want to touch on the Punisher Max, which was a comic series you worked on. And I know so much people love your Punisher work. But so yeah, how did that come about, and what was it like to get to work on the Punisher? And if anyone hasn't read Punisher Max, I'm going to ask a question soon that might be a bit of a spoiler, so I'd advise maybe click off the video and go read it. But yeah, no. So how did Punisher Max come about?
Well, that came from me being such a huge fan of Garth Ennis's Punisher Max run, which is still one of my favorite runs by kind of anybody on anything ever.
Huh. Wow.
Those, 60 or so issues, I think, of just such good comics. And so it was announced, at the time that Garth was leaving Punisher. And I just said, like, hey, I would want to throw my hat in the ring for this. Which on the one hand is like terrifying. Of
Yeah.
I'm still nervous whenever I'm around Garth. Like I've gotten, he's like the nicest guy, sweetest guy. He's always been very kind to me. But every time I'm around him, like, oh my God, that's Garth Ennis. So even more so at that time. So it's on the one hand, it was terrifying to want to follow this legendary run and knowing like, well, I can't do exactly what he did. Whatever I do, it'll have to be different. But at the same time, I think those are the things you have to get excited about as a creator of like, oh man, I love what this guy did. I would love to try to follow that up. So it's kind of just me saying, hey, I'd love to do this. And got to, and again, got to continue on kind of what Garth had set up and play off of so much of what he had established about the character, and then also try to do something a little bit different, brought in Kingpin and Bullseye and
Yes.
some of these existing, Max versions of existing Marvel characters. And so, yeah, I'm really, really proud of that run. I got to work with Steve Dillon for the entire of that, which was a huge thrill. And so, yeah, I'm really, really proud of how that whole run turned out.
Yeah, and so you brought up there the villains you got to include, and you included my favorite comic book villain of all time. Well, I mean, probably one of them. He's definitely up there, Bullseye. And I think Bullseye is just such a cool character. And so, did you know from the start you wanted to add Bullseye in this series, or was that over time? You're like, oh, who'd be a good villain for this?
Yeah, pretty quick. I mean, we, like was talking about using Kingpin and having it be sort of the rise and fall of Kingpin. And then I knew right away that, oh, well, I want Bullseye in there too.
Yes.
And I then, just had this idea of like Bullseye is in this version, he's the hitman who never misses. So once he kind of is given a target, he's like going to figure out that everything he can about that person, get inside their head. So I like that idea of that chase of him looking at Frank Castle and saying, something doesn't make sense about this guy. Something doesn't make sense about what we're told about this guy, about what his origin is, right? Which was also me as a reader, like looking at kind of how his origin had laid out and say, like, hold on, like there's something here that doesn't fit. And that's sort of what Bullseye figures out about him and how he's able to get to Frank and get inside his head as he figures out there's a piece missing of what we think we know about Frank Castle and how he became the Punisher.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you included like a villain called the Mennonite. Is that right? And
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I'm
That's
not
right.
sure if you've seen season 2 of The Punisher, but there is a character very reminiscent of that with the whole religion aspect. So I was like to kind of see, like, obviously it was very inspired by your Punisher run, but I was like to see a character inspired by your work being a huge major villain on a Punisher show.
Cool. Yeah, I actually have not seen season 2, so yeah, I haven't seen that.
Well, that question's just out the window. You know, you have to watch these things. You know, as a huge comic book writer, I'm sure you have so much free time on your hands. You know, like you literally have nothing going on. You know, I'm sure that's it. Um,
I do like I've loved all the Marvel Disney Plus shows. Those have all been really good. I
mhm.
watched those with my son. But yeah, I find there's not enough hours in the day these days to read and watch movies like I would like to.
Yeah, I mean,
That's my goal, is to get back to that someday.
I'm sure the Salvation Day will come. But so there's this question that I want to ask. Now, Punisher, I think he's a really fascinating character to me because the thing about anti-heroes is that they're always kind of slanted one way. Like you look at a character like Moon Knight, he's an anti-hero, but he's more good than he is bad. But then there's a character
Sure.
like the Punisher who's kind of like, okay, well, which side is he? So my question for you, do you think that Punisher is necessarily a superhero or more a bad guy, I guess you could say?
Well, I mean, I think I've kind of written him in some senses both. Like
Yeah.
I have liked at time. I haven't written Punisher in the Marvel universe that much, right? Like Punisher Max was in the Max universe, so very much a different sort of thing. And then
Yeah,
that
yeah.
one, I very much wrote him as this is a scary guy whose life is not going to end well, right? Like this is definitely will end badly for him. Like there's no other way around it. It's not a happy story. It's a very tragic, awful story. So it's not a guy in any way to be celebrated. And I think Frank would be the first one to tell you that. Like,
Yeah.
whoever you are, you don't want my life, right? Like, this is not a road to walk. He still feels like it's one he must walk, but
Sure.
certainly wouldn't want anybody else to do that. Um, in the Marvel universe, it's been different. Like, I have written stories with Frank, teaming up with other characters. Like, he was a part of War of the Realms,
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get to that. Yeah, that's brilliant.
I liked. Like it made sense. Like, okay, we're doing this big war story. Having the Punisher pop up and be a part of that was fun. But yeah, it's um, there's a lot you could get into there in terms of Punisher standing next to the Avengers and some of these characters. Um, so yeah, I don't think you can drive past that and just treat him as another superhero. He's not, because of what he does and how he does it, who he is. He's not just another one of those guys.
Yeah, and like I love the thing about Punisher Max is that this version of Punisher is not the one we know. If anything, he's more, well, I guess you could say eviler. Like he's at this point, he's been doing it for so long, he's just a machine who just basically just does what he has to. Like he basically lost all human emotions. So do you know that that's what you wanted to do since the start, kind of portray this more heartless version of the Punisher?
Well, I mean, I think to me, I would, the that's what Garth had set up, right? Like that
Yeah.
Frank was just a force of nature. Frank is unchanging. Like Frank is nothing is going to happen that is going to change Frank. Like Frank knows who he is. He's got his code. Everything is very black and white, and that will continue until he's dead. Like nothing is going to change that. So that was very much to me like who he was in Garth's run and everything Garth had done. So I was just continuing on with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, so for my final question regarding the Punisher, everyone, if you haven't read Punisher Max, click off now. I'll just give you a quick second. I think you know where I'm going with this. But of course, at the climax of the Punisher, we saw the Punisher die. And that was like, wow, okay. So did you know from the very start that you wanted to end up killing the Punisher at the end of this series? And I know in the back of the issue, it says like you decided to kill him on a train ride to Coney Island or something. So did you
Yeah.
know from the start that the Punisher has to die at the end of this?
Yeah, I think so, because again, I was looking at kind of the way Garth had set things up, and and in Garth version, in that Max version, Punisher was still a Vietnam veteran, right? Like, so the dude was getting old, and I wanted to keep that. I didn't want it to be like, well, we'll change it, and and just to keep him fighting the way he's been fighting. I
Yeah.
wanted to see like that life start to catch up to him, because he's not Captain America. He doesn't have a super soldier serum. He's just a dude. He's a dude who's been doing that job for a long time. So at some point, right?
Ooh, I
At
know.
some point, it's got to end, right? Like at some point, he's got to die.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so I wanted to see the story of like, well, how does that happen? What does that look like? And yeah, thankfully, I got to do exactly that, and I was really proud of how it all turned out.
Yeah, and I won't get into the specifics, but if you haven't read the series, definitely go pick it up. I assume if you can't get it from your local comic book store, you probably get it from eBay or something. But yeah, no, like that was obviously such an huge moment for the character of the Punisher, and I think in a weird way, like if a character like Spider-Man dies, I'm gonna be like, oh man, why would you do that, Spider-Man? But if a character like the Punisher dies, I'm like, oh well, I mean, he probably wanted that. Like he kind of just hates life at this point, so it's like maybe it's a nice thing to do. And we see that really he just he doesn't really care how this goes, whether he dies or lives. So I mean, I think he's one of those characters where where whenever he dies, I think it's kind of like a sweet release for him. But yeah, no. So you touched on there. You also got to use Punisher in War of the Realms, which oh man, I loved War of the Realms. It's one of the greatest comic book events of
Oh,
all time.
thanks,
I'm so excited to get
thanks.
into it. But so how did War of the Realms even come about? Did you say it's time to start this big huge war with Malekith behind it all?
Well, it just grew out of what I was doing in Thor for years. Kind of, one of my first arcs on Thor was kind of the beginning to the realm. So I kind of knew, really, the event started back then, right? Like this war started and just kind of moved through the different realms, and um, we just knew that at some point there would be no realms left except for Midgard, and that would kind of be the final chapter as the war comes here. So it was very much just a story I was doing in Thor, that I was, it's not like I had aims to like, well, we'll get to this point and then it'll be a big event story. It's
Yeah.
just like, well, I'm just going to do the story I want to do, whether that's an arc of Thor or whatever. And I think as we got closer to that point, Marvel said, well, hey, why don't we make this a bigger thing? Which I was fine doing, because I was writing Thor, I was writing Avengers, like I would something that already involved those books. So I liked the idea of, again, I'm still just getting to tell the story that I wanted to tell, just giving it a bit bigger spotlight. And it was nice to do that as a way of, kind of wrapping up my run on Thor after, 6 or 7 years at that point.
Yeah, and that was such an amazing crossover, and had so many different characters included, like some pretty obscure one, and then some like big, huge ones. But at that, like, did you get to choose what characters you included? And was there any character that you were like, well, I didn't expect, but I'm really enjoying writing for this character?
Yeah, I got to set all that up and choose all that. Because again, it all grew out of what I'd, been doing in Thor for years.
Yeah.
Maybe the one that was a surprise that kind of came about in the moment was the Daredevil stuff, that
Yes.
I did. And I don't think I'd ever written Daredevil before, maybe at all. I don't think I had. Maybe, if so, maybe in a panel here or there, but never in any significant way. Um, so that was really cool. I got to do, as one of the War of the Realms tie-ins. I did a Daredevil story, with Andrea Sorrentino, which was really really fun. So getting to dive into that character, and then put them in a weird place where where Daredevil has these godly powers. Like that was a lot of fun.
So the first time you ever wrote Daredevil, you turned him into a god. Okay, Marvel, give Jason just an ongoing series with Daredevil, I beg. If this is what you do first time, I just can't wait to see what you do in future issues. But yeah, so the decision to turn Daredevil into a god, probably one of my favorite things of all time because it's just perfect. So did you decide that you know what would be good? Daredevil should be a god. Did you just decide that pretty early on?
Yeah, I think so. Just sort of looking for ways to incorporate some of those other Marvel U characters into the story. That one was, um, like my favorite one.
Yeah.
Definitely favorite one that we did there. So yeah, it's, again, Daredevil had not been a part of kind of what I'd been building in Thor, but um, is one of those things that just kind of clicked when we started talking about the bigger story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought that was absolutely amazing. But coming off War of the Realms, of course, that was all preempted by Thor. Now, not many people know about your Thor, and I'm only messing. It's literally one of the greatest things of all time. And in the background, you can see Mjolnir there. Perfect pronunciation there.
Oh
And
yeah, there's like multiple hammers around my office.
look, imagine if you're not worthy to pick up any of them, though, then they're just stuck there. You'll never manage.
Exactly.
Never manage to sell the house. But yeah, now so Thor. Now you've gone to work on Thor. I believe it was 7 years, right?
I think so. Yeah.
What was that like? And did you know at the time? Because I think, and imagine you felt a bit pressured because after a while, so many fans like loved this series at the time. So were you a bit pressured while writing this? Like, wow. And was that kind of an odd experience for you?
No, I mean, no, I don't think I felt pressured. I mean, it was, yeah, it was a great experience. Thor was one of those, again, not a character that I grew up as a huge fan of. It was just one of those characters that felt right at that moment in time um, to say, hey, I think I've got a Thor story I want to tell. And yeah, that turned into 100 plus issues and
Wow.
7 years on the character. Um, and it was a lot of fun, and even that within that I got to do different versions of Thor. The kind of Thor God of
Nice.
Thunder series was different than the Jane Foster stuff that came after that, which was also different than the Thor series I did with Mike Del Mundo, and the King Thor stuff like War of the Realms. Like those were in one sense all one big story, but also very different stories in and of themselves.
Yeah, and so one of the most iconic things you probably did in your tour storyline was you made Jane Foster Thor. And I'm sure you get so many questions about this, so please forgive me. But considering with the new film, like, I mean, obviously some of your storylines are going to be kind of adapted. So yeah, turning Jane Foster into Thor is probably one of my favorite comic book decisions of all time. So, did you decide, okay, Jane, it's time for a new Thor. Jane Foster should be Thor?
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. I mean, the I kind of always had the idea of after making worthiness, the idea of worthiness such a big part of my run, and the idea that Thor would wake up every day and look at his hammer and not know if he's going to be able to lift it. Like that's very much the key piece of what motivates him and what drives him. Making all that stuff such a big focus point, I knew that okay, someday I'm going to get to the point where he can't pick the hammer up, and then what is that story? And that would open the door for somebody else to come and pick it up. Now, first, I think my first idea was probably a big direction, but as we went on, as things developed, we realized, okay, no, this should be like its own big thing, and it worked out. That was around the same time that Sam Wilson was becoming Captain America. So then we
Oh,
had to
yes.
we had sort of these two launches, the new Captain America book and then this new Thor book around the same time. And then even as we launched that, we knew like Secret Wars was kind of looming in the future. So we had, okay, so we've got like, I think 8 months or so before Secret Wars comes. And then, basically every book at Marvel is canceled and we do
Yeah.
Secret Wars and then stuff comes out of that. So because of that, I knew I had this period of time to kind of play with. So that's why we did the sort of idea of we didn't know who this new Thor was, played with, which was a lot of fun to play with, who it could be, have Thor Odinson trying to figure out who it is. But at the same time, I knew it was Jane the whole time, and I was kind of itching to get to
Yeah.
Jane's story. So once we came out of Secret Wars and did that new book, that's I was really able to dive into, okay, this is who she is, this is why she's Thor, this is what it looks like, the fact that it's killing her, all that stuff. I was really really excited to do, and really, again, super proud of how that all turned out. I'd say it's one of the things I'm most proud of from everything I've,
Absolutely.
I've ever done at Marvel is that Jane Foster story.
I can absolutely see why. But the thing about like Thor, and this is something that you explored brilliantly, but it's like he really has his own world. Like Asgard has kind of sometimes just been portrayed as this one location. But there's 10 realms and there's all this like there's Jotunheim and all these different places. So did you know from the start, I really want to explore some of the I really want to do some world building and explore the other parts of Asgard and Midgard and all these new places.
Yeah, I mean that was really the idea for the War of the Realms
Yeah.
is to is to do world building, because when I got the gig, I didn't know, I couldn't name the nine realms. We had nine then we added one more, so now we got 10. So I didn't know what they were. I didn't know which one was made of fire and which one was made of ice, and as I started looking at the way they'd kind of been portrayed, in Marvel Comics, the portrayals weren't always consistent as to terms of like, what do these look like? Where do the elves live? Where do the dwarves live? Where do the trolls live? Like those that had changed from time to time. So some of us I wanted to do, okay, let's define this stuff. Like let's define, give everybody a roadmap. So if anybody else wants to go visit these realms, they can say, well, this is what we can tell them. This is what it looks like. This is who lives there, who's in charge. Are they good guys, bad guys? So some of it was just to go through and define all that, and so doing a war that sort of moved from one realm to the other, where every realm is either, you know, joining up with Malekith or getting conquered, is a good excuse to visit all those realms, and
Yeah.
and so over the course of my run, I visited every one of them to give you an idea of what they look like, what are the people like. So yeah, it was very much about that world building, because that's one of the things that makes Thor different from character swinging around New York City, right? Is that Thor has all these realms he can go visit that the other characters don't go to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you did a brilliant job there. But you also introduced one of my favorite comic book villains of all time. And obviously, this character was so cool that Christian Bale is going to be playing him. Like, is there really a higher praise than knowing Christian Bale is going to play a character created by you? But Gorr the God Butcher, who's the most terrifying character of all time, but he's also so cool. And I'd be really interested here. Like, how did Gorr come about? Did you? Because I think there's a problem with characters like Superman, is in how do you make an actual villain for someone who is literally that strong? And then we have someone like Thor, who is just as strong and he has this big hammer. You can't have just this regular human go up against him. You
Right.
have to come up with these great ideas. So, did you make Gore the God Butcher to be a worthy adversary of Thor?
Yeah, I mean, it was really about kind of with that first big arc on Thor. I wanted to do something, again, sort of like we talked about before. It was like I wanted to show like this is what's cool about Thor, right? And this is how Thor is different from Spider-Man or Captain America or any of these other characters. So I wanted to, one, lean into the idea of him being a god, and those ideas of worthiness and what it means to be a god in the Marvel universe. So as part of that, I liked the idea of setting up a bad guy who is a serial killer of gods, and
Yeah.
who would be, very much pointing out, um, the downside of gods in the Marvel universe, that these gods are terrible, that these gods had failed him, in some horrible way, and that's why he hates them and he's going around killing all of them he can find. And then the other big part was the thing about Thor is that Thor, because he's a god, his adventures can stretch over the course of thousands and thousands of years, right? So I wanted to do one story that would show that. So that's why I started thinking about the three different versions of Thor, of doing a
Yeah.
story from the past and then the far future. And so then Gore just became bigger and bigger and bigger. He initially went from this guy, kind of a creepy guy in a cloak who's going around and killing gods, to he becomes this profound, basically like a god himself by the end, right? So yeah, but yeah, it was all kind of tied in to do like, okay, like what feels like a definitive Thor story, and that this shows you, uh, again, showing people why Thor is cool, not just feeling like people are going to come to the table and already know what's cool about Thor. Like, I'm going to show you everything that I think is cool about this character, and then Gore kind of grew out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now here's the $1 million question. Who would win in a fight, Gore or the Orb? It could go either way. What do you think? How does that
that'd
go?
be a
Orb.
that'd be a good tussle. Like maybe maybe I'll give Taika Waititi a call and see if he can work that in.
And
That'll
then
be the
is
after
that how
credit
Hollywood
scene.
works? Is it as easy as that? You just have him on speed
Absolutely.
dial,
Yep.
boom.
Sure.
Am
Can
I
we
am I a
CGI up the orb? Maybe I could play the orb. That would be even better.
wow? Am I a screenwriter now? Is it as easy as that?
Yeah.
I just came up with that one concept and I get to live off royalties.
Yep. You just made $150,000 just there.
It's as easy as that. Who knew the orb would be the key to becoming a millionaire? It's easy as that. Yeah, but that would definitely be a fair tussle. And hashtag, get orb into Thor Love and Thunder. But speaking of Thor Love and Thunder, has it really set in that the characters that you created and your run is going to eventually be used in an actual huge Marvel blockbuster? Has that set in for you?
I don't know. Probably not. Probably won't until I'm sitting in the theater and like see it and feel
Yeah.
like, oh, crap, I wrote that.
Yeah, and like imagine like you said you watch all the Disney shows with your child. Like he must think, wow, my dad created a comic that's going to be adapted into a Marvel film, or does he just not care?
No, he does. Yeah, he's excited. Yeah, he was. He was the first person I told when I found out about Gore. So
Wow,
yeah, he thinks it's cool.
I'd imagine, and it must be very cool for you as well. And having Christian Bale play your character, but I imagine you don't know too much about the film, so you'll have to wait and see it on the big screen.
Uh, I know a little bit, but yeah, not too much.
So
But I mean,
blink twice if the orb is in it. Just blink twice, all of a sudden. Everyone, you saw it there. You saw it there. It's canon. It's canon. It happened. Wipe your hands clean of that. But yeah, no. So of course, like Thor, and like, do you think, like, obviously, if presented with a chance, would you return to? Is there any character in particular that you'd like to return to and tell more stories with? Because I know you're currently doing the Avengers, so
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, they're characters I haven't touched yet that I would still like to tackle. And there's a couple that I've written before that I think I've still got more stories to tell.
yeah,
But again, some of it's always about kind of what's right at that moment in time, right? Like I've never walked around in comics with like, okay, well, I just want to write Spider-Man, and I've got my bag full of Spider-Man stories. It's kind of always been about like what feels right now. Why do I have a story to tell now, as opposed to where I'm carrying around a satchel full of stories. I mean, Conan is maybe one exception to that, and I've wanted to write
yes,
Conan since I was like your age,
really,
um, and and finally getting to do that. But beyond that, it's really very much about like what do I want to do now at this moment in time, and what's the best situation in terms of who I'm getting to work with and where I'm getting to work. So we'll see. I mean, the list is long in terms of like characters I'm a fan of and stuff
yeah.
I've read, and I think I could try to do a version of, but I'm always just kind of open to see where things go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can definitely see that. But you brought it up there, Conan. So were you a Conan fan growing up, or is Conan? Were you a Conan fan growing up?
Yeah, I found those Robert E. Howard stories, those
Ah,
paperbacks,
yes.
when I was pretty young, and those made a big impact on me. And so I've always been a huge Conan fan, and I've always wanted. That's one character that's always been on a list of like, oh man, I really want to write Conan someday. And then at some point, I think before I ever signed a Marvel exclusive years ago, I talked to Dark Horse briefly about doing a Conan thing that disappeared once I signed my exclusive. So that was kind of the closest I came before, and then found out that Marvel was getting the rights back to do more Conan books. So I basically called my boss, and like threatened to fight anybody else he would hire ahead of me for that gig, and got to do Conan the Barbarian, which I was really proud of with Mahmoud Asrar,
Oh,
and
brilliant artist.
it was kind of announced at the end of that run that we'd be coming back for more,
Wow.
which is still in the works, hasn't been officially announced yet, but
Exclusive.
I mean,
Ex-
I've made no secret of the fact that I've been working on more Conan. So
I'm just gonna say that's an exclusive there. That and the Orb miniseries, You Blinked, which is now it's canon. You Blinked, so I don't make the
Wait, now
rules.
he's got his own like he's got his own like TV miniseries? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, and
Or
I just saw like a banner go by. They were quick, like it's that easy. A bus went by with
oh,
the Orb sticker on it. I assume that's just how Hollywood works. You just say you want something, and then they just make it. But you've
sure.
gotten to work with like a volume of artists. Like you've also gotten to work with Esad Ribic and Thor, who was like, man, what a legend! Like he's a brilliant artist. And but so it's always kind of odd for you to look at like something that you've written as an art, like you actually holding comic book page with your words on it. Is that kind of a bit surreal for you?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, every time. I mean, every time I get those emails, and I get to see that art having come to life. It's that part never gets old. And then, for a few months after that, I'll go to the local comic book shop and like that thing is, it's a thing now. Like it started as just some words I put on paper and traveled around to multiple people, usually around the world, who contribute to it, and then it becomes this comic that I can drive 10 minutes, from my house and buy.
Yeah.
No, that part never gets old. I think hopefully it as long as I live and work in comics, it never gets old. I think if it does, like if you start to take that for granted, then I should probably find another job. But so far, 16 years in to doing comics full time, that part hasn't gotten less exciting, and I don't envision that happening.
Yeah, and see, look, if comic book writing doesn't work out, we already have you cast as the Orb, so we're all set. You don't even have to worry about things like that.
Sure, if I'm have an acting role where my face is completely covered with a giant eyeball, so I don't have to emote. Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe I could do that.
Would you go full method with it and just wear it everywhere, like at the grocery shops or anything?
Oh, I would do that now if I had one for sure.
Just a Marvel, go send it to them. Now, you've said that, so you just have to do it now. Everyone will just kind of think, oh, Orb, Jason Aaron, and then that's how you get casted. You see, I'm just a wealth of
Sure.
Hollywood advice. I basically know how everything works, as I'm sure you can see right here. But the last comic I want to touch on that you got to do quite a bit of work on was Star Wars. And I know you did that with Kieran Gillen. It was friend of the YouTube channel here. But you did
Right.
some brilliant work on Star Wars. So who's your favorite Star Wars character?
I think surprisingly my favorite character to write was C3PO, which
Wow,
I
really?
never would have imagined coming into it. But he was so much fun to write. I mean, again, as a guy, C3PO is a character who never really accomplishes anything of value to anyone and seems to complain and belittle everyone else around him.
Relatable.
Maybe right, maybe that's why he was so much fun. But yeah, I mean, all those characters were fun, like getting to write Luke and Han and Leia and
Boba Fett,
right,
the best.
right. We got to figure out how to bring Boba Fett in and have him fight Luke Skywalker in a way that wouldn't upset any of the apple carts. And Kieran and I both brought in Jabba the Hutt, got Jabba the Hutt and Darth Vader together, which was a lot of
Yes.
fun. So yeah, all that stuff was such a blast. I had a lot of fun getting to play with those characters and getting to work with Kieran. Kieran and I had kind of worked together on X-Men stuff before. We
Oh
were
yes, that's right.
two of the main X-Men people during the Schism days, and then we got to plan out all the X-Men stuff together, go to the Skywalker Ranch together, and look at lightsabers, and then it was a lot of fun doing both of the two big crossovers we did. The first one was Vader Down, which we figured out over the course of a dinner at a Brazilian steakhouse in New York, and then the second one was the Screaming Citadel, and so both of those were a lot of fun. Like I loved all those characters that Kieran created in the Darth Vader series, with Dr. Aphra and those evil droids. So getting to write those characters was a huge thrill too.
Yeah, and I believe this was a story that played, or a page that played in both chapters. But is it true that Boba Fett actually discovered out, actually told Darth Vader that Luke was his son, because he came up with just the name Skywalker? And
Yeah,
was
yeah,
that
we
you
got
or
to
Kieran?
No, that would. I mean, we probably both wrote that scene, but I think it was
Yeah.
first in Star Wars. Yeah, I mean, it was one of those like big moments. We talked about as we were working first starting both those series, like we wanted to grab for big moments, and so that was one I was very happy that they allowed us to do. Um, which one it gave Boba Fett something to do, like
Yeah.
Boba Fett, who didn't seem to have scored too many victories back in those days, like to have him, even after he'd, sort of lost or failed to grab Luke to come back with that name was really great. And and John Cassaday, really drew the hell out of that scene and
Of course.
in that issue. But yeah, it was all about kind of to grab for big stuff. The end of that first issue, we got Luke and Vader face to face. So it was like how big can we make this? Let's make it feel like this book is important, right? Like it's not just these aren't just stories you can read and they maybe add to what but you also don't have to read them. We wanted to feel like, no, this is vitally important to understanding this overall narrative.
Absolutely. And so we just pushed over an hour, so I'm about to finish up. But before you finish up, is there anything, I don't think we could actually end it on a better note, but is there anything you'd like to promote or talk about? I know Avengers 47 comes out. Of course, I have to wear my Avengers shirt. But Avengers 47 just came out. Is there anything else you can talk about, of course?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be it's a busy time right now for me, which means it'll be a busy time towards the end of the year release wise.
Ooh,
The Avengers current arc is going on, and then there's the Avengers Free Comic Book Day issue, which comes out.
nice. 14th
Is
of
that
August,
this?
is it?
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
Yeah. Oh,
So
man.
that
That's coming out.
that kind of that sort of points the way towards Avengers number 50 slash 750, which is a
Mm,
big oversized issue. It's the biggest like single issue comic I've ever written. It's really huge.
wow.
So that's the culmination of a lot of stuff that's been going on in Avengers, and also sets the stage for a lot of big stuff to come over the course of next year.
Yeah, I'm gonna go in on Free Comic Book Day and be like, it's okay. I'm best friends with Jason Aaron. I'll just take a stack of the Avengers stuff and I'll see you later.
Absolutely. Yes, tell
It's
him I
easy.
sent you.
Yeah, I'll just say, oh, do you want his phone number? We're not that type of friend, but we're basically on a first name basis. So I assume I just get these, like all of them for free. But yeah, so anything else besides the Avengers that you can talk about, or are you on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and Twitter. I got a newsletter, website.
Nice.
All those things are easy to find.
Oh,
But
newsletter.
yeah,
Nice.
yep.
That'll all be linked down in the description. But is that jasonaaron.com? Your website?
JasonAaron.info.
Oh, dot info. See,
Somebody else already had .com.
there's just too many Jason
I don't know who
Aarons
the
in the
hell that
world.
guy is. Right.
There's just too many Jason Aaron. I'm sure it's just a Jason Aaron fan account or a Jason Aaron fan account talking about why the Orb is the best character. And
Right. Probably it should be.
it has to be. If it's not that, then we're all out. But yeah, you can check out everything in the description below. But thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you all in the next video. Jason, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Me and my dad, we adore your work. He loves your Punished work. So it was such an honor. And if you watch my YouTube channel, I've mentioned before, Jason is one of my dream interviews. So you know how big this is for me. But I'll talk to you a little bit here. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at SamboGizmo1. And please make sure to donate to the National Deaf Children's Society. There'll be a link for that down in the description. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next video. Jason, thank you again for coming on, and bye.